This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Seconds ago, the most recent temporary deal between the U.S., its partners, and Iran ran out. But the word from Vienna is that a deal is said to be imminent. What that means, we don't know. We're awaiting word on a possible extension of that agreement, as well as the ongoing negotiations toward a permanent deal to limit Iran's nuclear activities, specifically the building of a weapon. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Britt Hume here in the Bureau with just how easy it might be for President Obama to get a bad deal past Congress. But we begin with correspondent Rich Edson, live very early in the morning, Tuesday in Vienna. Hi, Rich.
Good evening, Brett. And it appears as though they have breached another deadline here. All talks, by all indications, are continuing here in Vienna. And even if they do reach an agreement this evening or sometime tomorrow morning or anytime soon, it will very likely be a difficult sell for the Obama administration to Congress.
Meetings, breakout meetings, discussions, continued negotiations, and promises an historic nuclear agreement is in reach. Suggestions from anonymous diplomats the final handshakes are only a few hours away. Even the Iranian foreign minister teased in a tweet that a deal is close. Then, assurances from the administration of progress with a familiar caveat that several sticking points remain.
Again, real progress has been made. I think Secretary Kerry's been clear that we're closer certainly than we've ever been, and what's now, 3 years of work.
The 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and Germany have been in talks for years to lift economic sanctions in exchange for assurances Iran will curb its nuclear program. Several delayed deadlines later, the sides only have a framework, vague and disputed in many key areas. And for President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry, a skeptical Congress.
Ratchet up the sanctions. That's what brought them to the table in the first place. That's why they were hurting. That's a strategy that I think could have been deployed a couple of years ago. It could have got us to a better place.
The administration says if these talks fail, Iran's nuclear program will continue unchecked.
And when it comes to a tough sell, I think the tough sell is going to be on the part of Republicans if they try to tank the deal. It's going to be a tough sell to say that the United States should back away from an international agreement. It's going to be a tough sell to say that the United States should throw away the best possible avenue for preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Opponents generally want the administration to maintain economic sanctions on Iran. This, as a letter from the Director of National Intelligence to Senate Republicans last month claims, quote, Iran remains the foremost state sponsor of terrorism and is increasing its ability to influence regional crises and conduct terrorism.
If international negotiators ever do reach a deal, Congress can review it and can outright reject it with a 2/3 majority vote in each house. Brett?
Rich Edson live early Tuesday morning in Vienna. Rich, thank you. It's a fluid situation. We'll head back for any breaking details. You already know Congress gets a look at whatever deal comes out of Vienna, as Rich just mentioned. But you may not know just how little real muscle lawmakers may have. Senior political analyst Britt Hume is here with that story tonight. Good evening, Britt.
Hi, Brett. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was surely right in saying on Sunday that an Iran nuclear deal along the lines that have been reported will be a, quote, hard sell in Congress. But the good news for the Obama administration is that it doesn't have to sell it to Congress. It simply needs to sell it to 1/3 plus 1 member of 1 House. That's because the deal is not being handled as a treaty, though many argue that's exactly what it is. Instead, it's being handled as what's called an executive agreement. Such agreements do not require congressional approval as treaties do. But Congress does have the authority to disapprove this deal. But a resolution to do that would have to pass both houses and would be subject to a presidential veto. Overriding that would take 2/3 of both houses. Thus, if the president can hold 1/3 plus 1 member of either house, the deal would stand, even if opposed by huge majorities in both houses. If that's what happened, the president would surely count it a major victory and a legacy achievement. But don't expect much high-fiving and fist-bumping among other Democrats who are set to face the voters next year, including former Secretary of State Clinton, who was last seen waffling on the Pacific trade deal she once strongly supported. It should be fun to watch her try to handle the Iran hot potato. Brett?
If this deal has the structure that we think it has, one of the big things is this lifting of the UN arms embargo. Across the board, people said that that is probably going to be a bad thing in the big picture.
Well, that's something new that we hadn't heard about. We'd heard about other things that Iran was going to get. We certainly hadn't heard about the lifting of the arms embargo. If Iran gets that, That might change the situation to where the president would be unable to hold 1/3 plus one member of one house, because that was never part of this. And you know, you can't find anybody who thinks it's a good idea.
Including his defense secretary and chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
Exactly right, Brett. So my sense about that is, my guess is Iran tried this at the last minute just to see what would happen. I don't think they'll get it, but if they do, all bets are off.
All right, Britt, thank you.
You bet.
The Iraqi government's long-awaited operation to take back Anbar province has begun. ISIS militants seized large parts of Anbar earlier last year. You may remember the Iraqi forces are joined by Shiite and Sunni pro-government fighters. There's no word whether the U.S.-led international coalition is taking part in this effort. The son of a Boston police captain is charged with plotting to commit terrorist acts on behalf of ISIS following his arrest on July 4th. An FBI affidavit says 23-year-old Alexander Chikolo talked with cooperating witnesses about setting off pressure cooker bombs and executing college students live online. The Pentagon will announce a major policy change this week, ending the ban on transgender service members. Officials say military branches would have 6 months to assess the impact of the change and work out the details. Greece has reached a deal with its European creditors on a new bailout, but the Greeks will have to make even harsher cuts than those they voted down earlier this month. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg has the story tonight from Athens.
In the end, in order to remain in the euro, Greece had to agree to a deal much tougher than the one voters said no to in that referendum 8 days ago.
The secured financing for the next 3 years will create the feeling for the markets, for the investors, that Grexit is a thing of the past.
Greece's referendum costed a lot of political capital with creditors. Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras understood he had run out of wiggle room.
Trust needs to be rebuilt. Those in charge in Greece have to take responsibility for what we have decided here politically in order to be able to implement it all.
The new conditions involve voting some reforms into law right away, introducing more austerity, privatizing $55 billion worth of assets, in large part to help pay down loans, something Greeks decry as colonialism. There are fears that much of the package will also lead to further recession, but there is also the other perspective.
A lot of the reforms suggested are pro-growth because they are about opening the markets, liberalizing professions, having the shops work on Sundays, all sorts of reforms that Greece should have done a long time ago in order to remain competitive in an otherwise very competitive world.
But here at a medical clinic where people volunteer their services to those who can't afford care, we got a different take. This dentist says he has seen where previous bailouts have taken Greece, and he is worried.
I don't think, personally, that the solution is by staying in the Eurozone and in the Euro. I believe that there was pressure from all over to accept this kind of deal.
Greeks elected their left-wing prime minister on his promises to end austerity. It's not guaranteed that Parliament will vote this deal through.
Brett, creditors expect the Greek vote on reforms to happen by sometime Wednesday, and then certain European governments need to have their own votes on it, and only then, Brett, can the actual negotiations for a third Greek bailout really begin. So actually, what we have now is simply an agreement by all the relevant leaders that Greece should stay in the euro and that it should remain solvent, but I hate to say there still is a bit of legwork left on this one.
Another negotiation continuing. Amy Kellogg live in Athens. Amy, thank you. Well, Wall Street reacted favorably to the news about Greece. The Dow surged today, 217. The S&P 500 was up 23. The Nasdaq finished ahead 74. We are learning more about the scope of the data breach involving millions of federal employees. The Navy Times reports every sailor, Marine, and Navy Department civilian who completed a security questionnaire in the last 15 years is at risk of having his or her data compromised. The director of the government's Office of Personnel Management, OPM, resigned last week. President Obama has cut the prison sentences of 46 nonviolent drug offenders, including 14 who were sentenced to life in prison. The president has now issued 89 commutations, most to non-violent offenders sentenced using outdated guidelines, according to the administration. It's part of an ongoing administration effort to make the criminal justice system fairer, at least in the eyes of the president.